Okay, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. We have the final half hour straight ahead. I
That
want to
was a
switch
fiery
gears.
segment.
It was. It was a very important one too. No doubt about it, John. Thank you for all that information.
Yeah, I
Because
don't mean to overwhelm. It's just I get really upset about this one. I like over the
you
top.
should.
My heart is pounding, and I don't think Canadians really see how this is going to impact them. And by the time they do, we're going to be way far
It'll be
gone
too
down
late.
this. It's horrifying to me. It is
The
absolutely
only hope
horrifying.
we'll have after that is if the current conservative leader actually repeals the law, should he become prime minister. That's the only hope we'd have left.
But can he, if the Liberals still have the dominance in the Senate?
Absolutely.
We're hoping beyond hope. Then that
Yeah,
that people are
but
going to
that's your last hope,
apply common sense. Exactly.
right? Okay, so
Anyway, no, it gets me not just because I'm a broadcaster. I see it more clearly, I think, because I'm a broadcaster. But Canadians, and Joseph, thanks for bringing it up, because I really think Canadians, this is just going on. They're unaware, and they need to be, because it's North Korea type stuff.
it's
North
worse than
Korea,
that.
China, Iran.
Yep.
Yep.
These are the
This-
countries
like,
that
this is-
control internet content.
And the way it's going to happen, and in the way Google is going to rank it, et cetera, based on the laws, Canadians will be oblivious to it. It's just going to show up in their Google ranking, and they won't even be aware, like you said, of all the regulations that are in place already. They're not aware of that. They're not going to be aware of it on the internet. And that's a travesty.
It is. This is the most insidious thing I think a government in Canada has done in a very long time.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me on and talking about it, guys.
No, not a problem. Now, I do want to move on to another topic. And this one, okay. This one bothers me. I was kind of torn between which way to go, because we have two topics left, but only one segment. So I'm going to go with this one. This is the headline. This is from World News. Taliban lashed 12 people before stadium crowd in Afghanistan. I'll just read a couple paragraphs here for those who haven't seen it yet. That way you get some idea of what's going on. The Taliban lashed 3 women and 9 men in front of hundreds of spectators in a provincial sports stadium Wednesday, signaling the religious extremist group's resumption of a brutal form of punishment that was a hallmark of their rule in the 1990s. The office of the governor of Logar province, south of the capital of Kabul, invited honorable scholars, mujahideens, elders, tribal leaders, and local people to the stadium in the town of Pul Alam in Logar. The invitations for the 9 a.m. event were extended via social media. These people were flogged. Let me just go to the bottom of this here and let you know why they were flogged. And when they talk about flogging, they're not talking about, these are long rattan canes and do a lot of damage. Those being punished received between 21 and 39 lashes each after having been convicted in a local court of theft and adultery, said an officer of the governor's office who spoke on condition of anonymity. The official said hundreds of people attended the lashings and that a ban was imposed on taking photos and video. Okay, so the reason why this bothers me so much is because we spent heaps of treasure, well over a decade, and hundreds of lives trying to get rid of this very thing. What was the point of the whole Afghan experience, not just for Canada, but for all the Western nations who went there, but especially for us? When we go there, we lost 139 people in that war. And by war standards, that's not a very high casualty rate. But in today's standards, every casualty is something that people know about. So why did we do it? If we were going to turn the country back over to these thugs, why did we go in the first place? Why did we allow them to set this form of Sharia law in place and then govern by it? And don't tell me it's because, that's just the way to do things. We didn't allow the Nazis to continue Nazism, or the Germans to continue Nazism after the end of the Second World War. Shintoism was gotten rid of in Japan, at the end of the war. That those things were not allowed. They were illegal. You couldn't do them anymore. You were not allowed. So we've done it historically, where we said this political outlook is so damaging and so dangerous and so insidious, we're getting rid of it. And if there's ever a case for that to happen, this is it. So we send over our very best, our very brightest. We fight like dogs. We're one of the most effective troops on the ground in Afghanistan for 10 years. It's just unbelievable that we would now have this situation. And look, it's easy to blame the Americans. Okay, let Joe Biden to pull out the disaster that was. Obama, saying, "Oh, the war's over, we're going home," when the war's not over. So it's just really, it tears me up, because if you don't go in there with a mindset of you're going to eradicate this and get rid of it and keep fighting until it's over, if we'd have taken it seriously right from the very beginning, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. But here we are back in Afghanistan watching the same kind of things happen that we got all upset about 20 years ago. So there we are.
Yeah, well, I think that what we're suffering from in Afghanistan, and to a lesser degree in Iraq, is a lack of real clear goals when we send forces into these territories, into these countries. And remember, originally, at least insofar as Afghanistan is concerned, the invasion of Afghanistan by Western forces, including Canada, was in reaction to the attack in New York on 9/11, which was essentially planned and staged from Afghanistan.
Right.
And so, and there had been a number of other attacks leading up to 9/11, and a number of attacks, attempted attacks, subsequent to 9/11. And so the invasion of Afghanistan was all about eliminating the terrorist bases and the safe haven for terrorists that were being used in order to plan and execute these kinds of attacks. It wasn't in its original inception about replacing the Taliban government and creating a different kind of government, a more Western-oriented government, if you want to use that term. So that was the purpose. And it was only later on that it became apparent that, well, maybe what we should be doing is we should be encouraging the emergence of a democratic government. Well, that was a whole problem in and of itself. And, you made the comparison, or you contrasted what happened in Afghanistan, or what's happening in Afghanistan, with what happened, let's say, in Germany after the Second World War. And by the way, I didn't catch the name, but I saw a comment that crossed the screen about, suggesting that Nick, you were joking when you talked about eradicating Nazism.
No, I wasn't.
The term Nazi is used an awful lot these days, but the truth is that Nazism as a serious political movement really was eradicated after the Second World War, and continues to be. That doesn't mean that there are people who claim that they're going to be Nazis, but it was a whole political movement.
As a political entity,
philosophy.
it was eradicated.
Right. So it really was eradicated as a serious political movement, and continues to be, tamped down. In Germany, you can't. There are things that you can't do that are illegal, like giving a Nazi salute in Germany is actually a criminal offense.
Yes, it is.
So they still take it very seriously. But here's the difference between what we did in Germany after the Second World War and what was done in Afghanistan. And that is that there was a very real and serious concerted effort, a desire, a goal to eradicate the Nazi ideology to the greatest extent, or to the extent that could be accomplished, and to replace it with something. And so, first of all, and there were very real differences between that and what happened in Afghanistan. The first thing is, you actually had a people who wanted to create a country, or to rebuild a country that
Right.
was, dare I say, Western liberal. Okay, and I
Right.
use liberal in a broad sense of the term, not ideologically
Not
the way
the
we talk about it
political
now
liberal we're
politically.
thinking of. Yeah.
Right. So there was a desire on the part of the population, and even those people who were supporting the Nazis during the Nazi era. I mean, Germany was well and truly beaten down, and the people were beaten down. So they
Yeah.
had enough of this, and two world wars, everything that went on between the two wars, and Germany was effectively a destroyed country. Uh,
Yes, it
and
was.
uh, and so there was a rebuilding process and a rebuilding of the political. But the thing is that, and this was another big difference. Number one, in Afghanistan, they didn't have that, what's the critical mass of a population that were committed to liberal democratic principles. Okay, so that's the first thing. It doesn't mean that there weren't people like that, but there was no critical mass to
I know what
build
you mean.
on.
Yeah.
The second thing with Nazi Germany is that, unlike the occupation of Afghanistan by the West, okay, what Western powers did in Afghanistan, I don't really call it an occupation. There was a lot of discomfort with the idea that we're occupying a foreign country, or that
Yeah.
we as Canadians are participating in the occupation of a foreign countries, okay, of a foreign country. That didn't exist in Germany after the Second World War. We occupied that country, we Canadians, along with our allies, and controlled absolutely everything in that country, ran everything. The Germans
That's
didn't
right.
run things. It was the allies, the administration that ran things. Schools, okay. We decided what curriculum was going to be taught, who was going to teach, and who wasn't going to teach. Newspapers were controlled, radio stations were controlled. A little ironic given what we talked about in the last segment, but
Yeah, that
the
is, isn't
fact
it?
is, the fact is that there was a real occupation and there was a real concerted effort to eradicate the ideology that was feeding the whole regime that we had just destroyed. That didn't
So,
happen in Afghanistan, Nick. It didn't happen in Afghanistan because we got caught up in this whole thing about, we have to respect the Islamic tradition. We have to expect. There were so many things that we had to respect. There was never a real occupation, and if you're not going to do it, then don't be surprised by the fact that they've just gone back to the way things were.
well, part of
Minus,
the
of course, the
problem in
terrorist
Afghanistan,
camps, okay, which was our original intent. So was
right?
our intent to build a Western-style liberal democracy in Afghanistan?
You know
I
something,
don't think
Joseph?
it was. I think that's, I don't think there was ever any serious intent to do that. There was
Well, let me jump in here for just a second.
yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
that, look, first of all, you're right about the Taliban. I would not care what kind of government they had in Afghanistan as long as it didn't spill over. First of all, Pakistan was a major player in this and fueled a lot of this. Part of the big struggle was stopping the flow of weapons and arms and people from Pakistan through the Afghan mountains into Afghanistan.
Right,
Like, it wasn't your local tribal elder that was the problem. It was these insurgents coming over the mountains and through the caves and so on that caused
sure.
all the grief, or were a big catalyst towards causing the grief. And I ask myself, unless you're willing to commit to totally going in there, treating it like World War II, why are you going? If they're to destroy the camps, okay, so you go in and you take the camps out, you leave, they rebuild them. I get that. But at the same time, unless you're going to be there for the long haul, um, I just think I was looking at Patricia's comment earlier about what her son went through. Yeah, here it is. Here, her son was deployed 3 times in Afghanistan. He's got PSD. He has so many physical injuries, not to mention mental ones. Yet the Canadian government has not given him the support he needs. Now that could lead us down a whole different topic, like what you're asking for. We don't Canada does not have, or you're asking for too much. the veteran out in BC when he was the prime minister was talking to him. That's
that's not our
reminiscent of
view,
that.
by the way. Just to be clear, we're not saying that you're asking too much. That's the view
Oh
of the
no,
government.
that's what he said. And that's
Yeah,
I
right.
don't think we've done our job as far as looking after these guys when they come home that we should have. So she's quite right to be upset about that.
Right,
However,
agreed.
the bottom line here is that you either fight a war to win it or you don't fight it at all, because the damage caused during a war. There's that old just war doctrine where you only go to war if the conditions of not going to war would be worse than if you went to war. That's how you decide whether a war is just or not. And if you want to go into a country like Afghanistan and destroy the terrorist camps so they're not a threat to the rest of the world, and you want to save the people of Afghanistan from the Taliban and their bloodthirsty 6th century code, all right, but take it seriously. Do it. Go get it done. Because NATO has over 1 million troops on the ground that they can draw from.
But Nick,
and
the
yet,
problem with Afghanistan, Nick, is that they don't have that critical mass of people who live there, who are committed to stepping in and creating and sustaining, again, to use the term, a modern liberal democracy, and we were never going to impose that on them. But the best example to use of how you could deal with this, and it's not a perfect example, but you have to look at what the Israelis do, is that they basically say, we're not going to tolerate the establishment of for instance, Hezbollah camps training terrorists and arming terrorists in Syria. And so we don't care. I mean, the irony of all of this in the Middle East, so far as Syria is concerned, is that when before the civil war, which was largely precipitated by Western interference in order to topple the regime, which was an evil regime, and I'm not defending the regime, but the reality is that Syria is not the people in Syria are not ready to rise up themselves and to sustain this kind of a liberal democracy. And so the Assad regime, as bad as it was at least providing some security and some stability. And I would argue that situation was probably better for the Syrian people than the situation they find themselves in now. And the Israeli government at the time could have said to Assad, as I'm sure they did, you take care of these guys in your territory, because if you don't take care of them and prevent them from establishing their camps in your territory, then we're going to come in and we're going to take care of it ourselves. And then we're going to leave. Yeah. And we don't care what the effect is on you, but we're not trying to change the regime in Syria. And so you have a limited...
That was not thinking in Afghanistan.
Well, yeah, that's the point, is you have to have a limited, clearly defined objective. And if the objective was to destroy these camps and to prevent their reemergence, that's a mission that we're perfectly capable of carrying out. And forget about trying to change the regime in Afghanistan, okay? And they're going to deal with their people the way they deal with them. And the term you used was 6th century. Well, maybe that is, and it's a terrible thing, but we're not in a position where we're going to change that. And we don't want to change it.
But you see something, here's the thing, Joseph. If the West were to go to Afghanistan and say, look, because the Taliban, they're going to do what the Taliban does. They hate the West, and excuse me, I will be very surprised to find out that they don't let Pakistan come back in and do what they did before the invasion. So if they set up terrorist camps, I would be completely happy with having the West say, we find a terrorist camp in your territory, you had better shut it down, because if you don't, take Israel's point of view, we're going to take it out. And, our jets will come over and turn it into a parking lot, and we're going home. I could live with that, because to me, that's a far smarter use of the resources that we have than losing 135 guys or 139 people and thousands injured in a cause we never really could win in the first place.
Well, that's what it is. It comes down to having a clear set of goals. Okay, you have to if you're going to do it, you know this stuff, Nick. I don't have to tell you. Okay, if you're going to go on a mission, you have to have a clearly defined mission. What is
That's
it
right.
that you're supposed to be doing? And that's actually important because quite often you have a mission to accomplish, but the plan in order to accomplish that mission, doesn't survive first contact with the enemy. So
That's
if you
right.
have a clear understanding of what your mission is, you can adapt your plan in order to meet changing circumstances and still accomplish what it is that your goal is. But we never had
Right.
a clear goal. In my view, we never had a clear goal. And I remember talking to people, policy people about this at the time, particularly in the lead up to the invasion of Iran, not Iran, I'm sorry, Iraq.
Iraq.
And especially my neocon friends, that were all about regime change, bringing freedom to the Middle East, and I go, what, really? Freedom is something that has to grow organically. If you don't just change the regime and all of a sudden the people change with it. This is something that's multi-generational, and as I say, it's organic. So what exactly you're going to invade Iraq? What is your exit strategy? What are your goals, etc.? And this was, I was a very big supporter of the George W. Bush presidency in the United States, but I think this was probably the biggest failing of his presidency, was the idea of going to war without a clear objective, the achievement of which would be the signal for you to now withdraw your forces. And I think clearing out terrorist camps is clearly the correct move to make with respect to Afghanistan. And if the people of Afghanistan are not going to rise up against a regime that's going to act barbarically and flog people in a public stadium, well, then, sorry to say it, but that's on them. It's not on us.
Yeah, true. And the only thing about that that gives me the chills is if they'll flog them now, today, what'll they do to them tomorrow? We're going
Well,
back
and
to
it's a
having
fair
women
question,
machine
but
guns.
what do you want us to do about it? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
rhetorical question, Nick. It's
Look,
not directed necessarily
I
at you.
guess my response to this was emotional because I was thinking of all the people who went over there and paid the highest price, both American, Canadian, Belgians, Dutch, all of the people who went over there, who paid that price. And at the end of the day, like, there are times when war is always ugly, but there's times when it's a just war. World War II, classic example. Even you could make the case for Korea. World War One, who knows? But there's times when fighting for a very clear goal to end a horrific evil is something you must do. And I'm prepared for that. But in this case, you're right about no clear what's the word, mission, no understanding of what it takes to win. Like pulling out the troops that Biden did at the end of the conflict, simply told the Taliban, the country's yours, and along with several $billion worth of
But
hardware.
but it was theirs, Nick. I mean, the Biden administration has taken a lot of heat from conservative sources for that decision. But dare I ask, and I'm asking this as a conservative, what choice is there? Are we going to, or are we going to continue to sacrifice soldiers in a mission that we're not even committed to, that the people of this country are not committed to? And what business is it of ours? What kind of regime and how the regime handles its own domestic affairs in Afghanistan? Now, again, I know that's a hard-hearted, cold-hearted way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But the alternative is that we spend all of our time and effort and treasure and blood running around policing domestic behavior around the world. Okay, so my attitude is I like the Winston Churchill formula. Okay, we can never be friends. We can never be on good, friendly terms with a regime like is existing in Afghanistan. But we can have proper relations with them. And by proper relations means we have diplomatic relations until such a time as we feel that it's necessary to cut off those relations or to limit those relations and activities and interconnection between our two countries because of the way they behave. But are we going to send soldiers to Afghanistan? If not, if we're going to do that, why not Myanmar? Why not Belarus?
Yeah, it's not the
You
only
know,
place in the world that,
it's
that
it's
has that
it's
problem.
so the answer is you have a very limited mission, and the limited mission is my job is to protect Canadians. If I'm the American government, my job is to protect Americans, etc., etc. And if that means that I have to, from time to time, send commando units in, special forces in, or maybe just fire a couple of cruise missiles at this terrorist training camp that I know is what's happening there, then that's what I'm going to do.
All
And
right.
if you don't want me to do that, speaking to rhetorically to the Afghanistan government, then you do it yourselves. But one way or the other, we are not going to tolerate the emergence of a terrorist network that perpetrated again the kind of activity that we were the victims of on 9/11. Not going to happen.
With that, Joseph, that pretty much brings us to the top of the second hour, which means our time together this week is over. I want to thank everybody in the chat room. I've been keeping an eye on it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to comment on, or we weren't able to comment on many of the comments, but there were some great conversations going on there. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. In the meantime, I'm going to say goodnight for the three of us. We'll see you all again next week. And in the meantime, ubiqueritas et amor, Dea CBS. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace. And may you have a fair wind and a following sea.